Welcome to the 7th of a series of More Beef from Pasture webinars. My name's David Brown and I work with Home Sacket, and Home Sacket are the New South Wales state coordinators of the More Beef from Pastures program. The More Beef from Pastures program is a MLA funded program, and the next webinar that we'll be hosting will be this Thursday this week at the same time as this evening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Daylight Saving Time, and that webinar will be focused on better beef marketing. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's webinar. You'll see on your screen now an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this in the top right-hand corner of your desktop. You're listening in on your computer's speaker system by default, and you'll have opportunities to submit text questions to today's presenter, Natalie Robertson, by typing your questions into the questions pane at the bottom of the control panel. You don't have to type your name as the technology links it to the questions. You may send your questions in at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. With that in mind, could I just ask everyone to find that question text box and just type in whether you can hear me okay, or whether it's whether I'm not coming through clearly. Yeah, there's a few people texting it loud and clear. Well done. Thank you, guys. I can see that you found where you can ask your questions, and it's good to know that I'm coming through clearly. Just a quick note, you will be receiving a recording of this webinar about 24 hours after the webinar is completed. Before we go on to Natalie's presentation, I just want to make you aware of the More Beef from Pastures program. It is fully funded by MLA, and the aim of these webinars is to give you a taste of the type of information that is available from the More Beef from Pastures program. Much of the information is available in more detail in follow-up events, where the aim is to improve knowledge and skills and ultimately change practices for the better. You have the option in the post-webinar survey to indicate what follow-up events you may be interested in, so please let us know. This slide shows a screenshot of the More Beef from Pastures online manual. This manual consists of 7 modules, each of which is highlighted in the banner at the top of the screen. Tonight's webinar fits into the Meeting Market Specifications module. Actually, my apologies. It doesn't fit into the Meeting Market Specifications module. It fits into the Herd Health and Welfare module. Thank you for providing us with that production information when you registered for this webinar. At the end of this webinar, there's also going to be a brief survey appearing on your computer automatically when you close the boxes that are holding the webinar platform. This survey is really short. It should take you less than 2 or 3 minutes to complete. We consider the information very important, and we ask that you stay online to complete them before you rush off. Capturing the information from participants is integral to the ongoing success of the More Beef from Pastures program. MLA uses the information to determine the success of the event, what information is considered important by you, and how they best deliver it. They realise that it is the producers' levies they're spending, and they want your input into their research, development, and extension into the future. So, without further ado, I'd like to present or introduce you to Dr. Natalie Robertson. Now 9 years into her veterinary career, Natalie is passionate about animal health and beef production systems. She started with Zoetis in cattle and sheep vaccine and drench R&D, and now Natalie manages their veterinary technical team. Tonight, Natalie will take a close look at reproductive diseases in beef cattle, what can be done to prevent them, and how to use animal health treatments to ensure maximum return on investment. I am, as I'm sure you are, very much looking forward to listening to and learning from Natalie tonight. So, to talk to us about common reproductive diseases in beef cattle, I'd like to introduce Dr. Natalie Robertson. So, Natalie, I'm going to change over and make you the presenter. Just bear with us a moment, guys, while we change our screens. Hello, Natalie. I've just unmuted you there. Can you speak to us now?
Yes, thanks, David. And thank you for the introduction. Let me just bring the presentation up on my screen for everyone to see. First of all, I just wanted to thank everyone for giving up their time. Generally, this is probably most people's dinner time, so I appreciate people taking the time to dial in and hopefully learning a little bit more about some key reproductive diseases that can affect the performance of your herds. Time is of the essence. I only have a short time with you this evening. So really the objective of this presentation is to discuss and highlight the impact that 3 key reproductive diseases could potentially have or may already be having on your herd's reproductive performance and ultimately your profitability. And then look at some simple steps you can take to prevent and control these diseases in your herd. If you walk away from this presentation and want to know more, the best point of contact is either your local vet or your Zoetis representative or vet contact, and we're always here and happy to answer any more questions that you might have and be able to go into some more in-depth detail about these diseases. Before I start looking at the specific diseases, I just wanted to put reproductive diseases into context, because obviously the reproductive performance of your herd is dependent on many factors, of which diseases and infections are just one important consideration. The 3 diseases that I'm going to have a look at this evening are Leptospirosis, Pestivirus, and Vibriosis. And a common theme for all of the diseases is the impacts that they can have on poor pregnancy test results, late calves and a spread out calving pattern, losses from pregnancy testing to marking, and even delayed losses in weaners and growing cattle. So the first disease for consideration this evening, I can change the slide, just wait for that to come up. So the first disease that we'll have a look at is Leptospirosis. So to cut right to the chase, why is Leptospirosis an important concern for beef producers? And you can see from the pictures on the screen that the impacts that lepto can have are 3-fold. Lepto can affect your cows, particularly your breeding cows, in terms of contributing to abortions, stillbirths, the birth of weak or dummy calves that die shortly after birth. It can have an impact on reduced fertility, and it does this through early embryonic loss, or the failure of a pregnancy to actually take and be carried all the way through to calving. Ultimately, this means low pregnancy rates, late calves, and fewer calves on the ground. The Leptospirosis disease can also affect calves directly and can cause severe illness and death in your calf cohort. Probably calves a little bit younger than the ones I've got in the photo there, but certainly can really target that calf cohort and result in deaths. And finally, I've got a picture of representing the consequences or impacts that lepto can have on people. Leptospirosis is what we know of as a zoonotic disease, which means it's a disease that can spread from animals to humans. And if you're unlucky enough to contract leptospirosis through working with cattle, the results can be pretty nasty. If you think of the worst flu that you've ever had, with muscle aches, fever, severe fatigue, you probably times that by 10, and that gives you an idea of how bad leptospirosis can make you feel. And it can take many months to fully recover from the condition. In fact, up to 1/3 of people who contract lepto can end up being hospitalised. So what causes this disease? The picture on the left shows a very zoomed in picture of the bacteria that causes leptospirosis. These bacteria are called leptospires, and they're really unique in that spiral shape. There are two major strains of leptospirosis that are important in terms of their effect on cattle in Australia, and they are nicknamed leptohargio and leptopomona. There are multiple other strains of leptospirosis that are out in the environment, but those are the two main variants of the bacteria that affect cattle and can spread from cattle to humans. How is it spread? As you can see, urine and reproductive tract materials are the ways that this bacteria can be spread either to other cattle in your herd or from cattle to people. This bacteria is really well adapted to living in wet environments, so very well adapted to living in the kidneys and spreading in urine, and also adapted to crossing the placenta in pregnant animals and getting into the reproductive tract fluids. Because it's so adapted to living in wet environments, stagnant groundwater, floodwater, dams are also environments where this bacteria can survive for many months. So a contaminated environment, particularly a wet environment, can enhance or facilitate the spread of this disease. This brings me to a couple of myths that I hear when I speak to people about leptospirosis, and I wanted to take a minute to set the record straight on some of these myths. The first common misconception is that only dairy farmers need to worry about lepto. Now, while it's true that if you're spending a couple of hours in the morning and afternoon milking cows, that can increase your likelihood of being exposed to urine, which may be infected with lepto. Anyone who works with cattle, anyone who works cattle in the yards, anyone who gets involved in difficult calvings and assisting with deliveries, anyone who gets involved in cleaning up aborted calves, if there have been abortions on farm, can get exposed to lepto. That includes you, that includes farm staff, it includes vets that come onto the farm, it includes abattoir workers processing cattle at the other end. So lepto is definitely a disease that anyone that works with cattle, beef or dairy, needs to be aware of and concerned about. The other common misconception is that lepto only occurs in high rainfall areas. Again, as we quickly discussed, wet environments certainly can increase and facilitate the spread of leptospirosis. But recent survey work that was conducted by Zoetis in partnership with the New South Wales LHPA focused on looking for evidence of leptospirosis in beef cattle herds that were in the drier inland areas of New South Wales, around the Central West, Darling and Lachlan LHPA areas. And this survey work showed that there was evidence of either previous or current leptospirosis infection in over 50% of the beef cattle herds that were surveyed in those drier inland areas. So we certainly can see leptospirosis in drier inland areas. So what can we do about this disease to control it in our herds and minimise that reproductive impact, and also to prevent the spread of lepto from cattle to humans? The first and most important step in controlling leptospirosis is to vaccinate all cattle with a 7-in-1 vaccine. This involves 2 initial doses 4 to 6 weeks apart, and following up with annual boosters to ensure that you have maximum protection against this disease. There is no vaccine available for people, so if we want to minimise the impact of this disease, on humans, then we need to focus on vaccinating our cattle. And then in partnership with the vaccination program, we have biosecurity measures. So these include purchasing vaccinated cattle to minimise the risk of buying in cattle that are already infected with and shedding lepto. Controlling feral pigs. I didn't labour the point due to time constraints, but that survey work that was conducted in New South Wales also highlighted how important feral pigs are as a source of lepto spread, in particular Leptosporosis. And because we know that the bacteria can survive for months in stagnant water and effluent, where practical, trying to minimise access of our livestock to stagnant waterways and effluent. Certainly that vaccination component is the most practically achievable. And with the 7-in-1, you get the added benefit of controlling those 5 common clostridial diseases as well. The second disease that I'd like to talk about this evening is Pestivirus, also known as bovine viral diarrhea virus, or BVDV. Bovine pestivirus is an important concern for beef producers, and its impacts are twofold. The first is the effects that pestivirus can have on reproductive performance, and these can be costly and varied. Pestivirus can affect pregnancy at any stage, from affecting conception rates to early embryonic loss, through to abortions, stillborns, the birth of malformed calves, and also the birth of what are known as persistently infected or PI calves. So those calves that get exposed to the virus during gestation and then are born permanently infected with the virus. And we'll have a closer look at an example of a PI on the next slide. Aside from that impact on reproductive performance, Pestivirus is also known to severely affect the immune system of animals that are infected with the virus. And that means that it increases the susceptibility of your herd to other diseases or secondary infections like scours, pneumonia, or in feedlots, Pestivirus can be the underlying factor for bovine respiratory disease. In fact, with all of these impacts on immune function and reproductive performance combined, this means Pestivirus is ranked as the #2 most costly disease affecting the red meat industry by a recent report published by the MLA. And that report actually quantified the cost of Pestivirus at $114 million annually. Just to the beef industry. That doesn't even account for the effects that it's having on the dairy industry. When we see Pestivirus first introduced into a herd, we can see what we would refer to as a train wreck, unfortunately, and there can be production losses of up to 50%. Once Pestivirus becomes established or endemic in a herd, we can then go on to seeing ongoing losses of 5 to 10% per year. So what causes Pestivirus? As the name suggests, it's a viral disease. Unlike Leptospirosis, which can survive in the environment for months, Pestivirus is a fragile virus that is easily destroyed by sunlight and exposure to drying or air. So it needs close contact between infected animals and naive or uninfected animals. And the main culprits for spreading Pestivirus are those PI or persistently infected animals, those animals that were born already infected with the virus. This picture is a perfect example of the production effects that being persistently infected with Pestivirus can have, because the animal in the foreground has been diagnosed as being a PI for Pestivirus, and next to it is its otherwise healthy herd mate. These animals were actually only born about 3 weeks apart, but you can see the impact that being persistently infected with Pestivirus has had on the animal in the foreground in terms of its overall growth, and it generally looks like a very poor doer with rough hair coat. Now, given that those cattle are in close proximity, if the cattle in the background hasn't already been exposed, that sort of close proximity to a PI puts it at high risk of developing the disease, which will set it back for a good couple of weeks before it then recovers from the disease and can move forward. So with that quick note on Pestivirus, and of course I could have spent the entire webinar just talking about this topic, but just to raise your awareness and get you thinking about the disease, the good news is we have excellent prevention and control methods available to us for managing Pestivirus. And key to managing Pestivirus is vaccination. When we vaccinate against Pestivirus, because the major effects that we see from this disease happen during gestation of our breeding females, we want to focus our vaccination timing on getting 2 doses in the first year in the lead up to joining. And then annual boosters in the 2 to 4 weeks prior to joining after that. We also need to make sure that our bulls are protected and that our bulls are not persistently infected and therefore could be spreading the disease to every female that they come in contact with. Sometimes it can be confusing to know where to start with Pestivirus control because there are a number of options. Really, I can split it down into 2 very simple where to start options. One is to do some testing, and this would involve engaging your local vet to do some blood testing of the mobs within your herd. You don't need to test every individual animal. You can test a small representative group of each mob. And what that testing can tell you is A, do you have Pestivirus in your herd? And B, which mobs have been exposed and have some natural immunity versus which mobs have never seen the virus before and are at significant risk of reproductive losses if they do get exposed and therefore would really benefit from vaccination. If you don't want to go down the testing route, then you can go vaccinating straight off the bat. The gold standard is whole herd vaccination, but an easy place to start is to start by vaccinating your heifer cohort pre-joining. Then we can go on to other steps like detecting and eliminating these PI cattle. As the previous slide showed, they tend to be very poor doing animals that are spreading both Pestivirus and other diseases to the rest of your herd. So it's recommended that these non-productive animals are removed from the herd, and there are biosecurity measures that are important as well to prevent the introduction of the disease. So as I mentioned, that includes testing bulls to make sure that they're not persistently infected, being really careful with, particularly if you're bringing pregnant females into your herd who may be carrying a persistently infected calf in utero, and minimising over-the-fence contact with neighbouring herds if you don't know what the infection status of those herds is. And finally, I wanted to introduce you to Vibriosis as the last disease to discuss this evening. Vibriosis is an important concern for beef producers, again because of its reproductive impacts, which really present as lower pregnancy rates. In fact, in recently infected herds, conception rates can be as low as 40%. We can see sporadic abortions at any stage of pregnancy, a spread out calving, typically with too many late calves, and we can also see reduced marking and weaning rates. Vibriosis also rated on the MLA's priority list of endemic diseases for the red meat industry alongside Pestivirus. And that report estimated that Vibriosis costs the industry $21 million a year. So what causes this disease? Vibriosis is caused by a bacterial infection which is spread during joining. Bulls actually carry the disease in their sheath and can infect female animals during mating. Now the bulls don't actually show any outward signs of being infected, and the disease doesn't affect their fertility or their ability to serve. But when they spread the bacteria into the female's reproductive tract, it causes a significant inflammatory response, which basically means the uterus is a hostile environment that won't allow an embryo to implant and a pregnancy to be maintained. So we end up having returns to service some weeks down the track as the female starts to recover from the infection. Having said that, up to 11% of females can become permanently infertile following an infection with Vibriosis. Fortunately, preventing and controlling Vibriosis is simple. I'm not going to tell you that you can do this with any other vaccine, but with Vibriosis, all you need to do if you're trying to prevent the disease from affecting your herd is to focus on vaccinating your bulls. Since we know that bulls are the carriers and the spread of this disease, by vaccinating bulls we can break that cycle. And so you can invest in vaccinating your bull team and have flow-on benefits of protecting your entire female breeder cohort. Again, because we see the effects of this disease around the time of joining, the ideal time to vaccinate is in the lead up to joining. And for the first year, bulls need 2 doses of the vaccine, 4 to 6 weeks apart, and then annual boosters prior to joining each year. Bull management is another factor in the control of Vibriosis. We know that older bulls are a much higher risk for being chronic carriers of the disease. So considering culling older bulls, those bulls older than 7 or 8 years of age, can help to mitigate the risk. Biosecurity is also important, and this really is focusing on keeping out stray bulls that may be carriers of the disease. And just a quick mention of AI, if you're using semen from accredited AI centres, these will be free, tested free of both Vibriosis and Pestivirus. So that can be a helpful control method, but of course that can completely fall by the wayside if you take a lot of care with AI and then introduce a mop-up bull or bull team that haven't been vaccinated and could spread the disease. That really is a quick snapshot of 3 key reproductive diseases. Hopefully it's got you thinking about whether these may be important considerations for your herd and giving you some easy ideas for how you can control these diseases. I'll wrap up there and hopefully we've got a bit of time at the end for some questions if anyone has been sitting on any questions. I'll hand back over to David, and thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Natalie. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Very concise and very informative. Now, Natalie will stay on the line for as long as we need to answer questions that have been coming throughout the presentation. If you've got a question that you haven't asked, I'd like to encourage you to put it into the question pane at the bottom of your control panel and she'll be able to attend to it. Again, thanks for participating in the webinar and you're welcome to sign off now. We've ended perfectly on time. Thank you, Natalie. And if you do, please take 2 minutes to complete the post-webinar survey. It'll pop up after you close the webinar windows. It is actually very important to us and we appreciate your time when you do this. Now, for those who do want to stick around and have a few questions answered or listen in to the answers of the other participants' questions, yeah, there's a few coming through here. So, Natalie, can you see that those questions come through there for you?
Not on my screen, unfortunately.
Okay, well that's okay. I can ask them to you, Natalie. If you
Okay, thanks.
So, I think it's Matthew and Mary Ellen have asked a question for you. They say, why a 7-in-1 for steers? And I guess that's in respect to the Pestivirus, is it?
The 7-in-1 relates to the control of the clostridial diseases and leptospirosis. So in terms of vaccinating your steers with 7-in-1, you're absolutely right. You're much less concerned about any sort of reproductive impact that lepto may be having. But aside from the fact that you're protecting those steers from the facial clostridial diseases like enterotoxemia and blackleg, which certainly can affect young growing animals, if you're taking those steers through the yards at any stage, there is the potential for you to be exposed to their urine, and if they are infected with lepto, then that presents a risk for you or your staff or your vet becoming exposed to and infected with the disease. So for steers, it really is focusing on those benefits of preventing the spread to people.
Okay, thank you for that, Natalie. Jason has asked a very good question here. If you have detected PI animals in your herd, why eliminate when they could be used as carriers to self-vaccinate the herd?
Thanks, Jason. And when I present just on Pestivirus for an hour, I always go into that topic. The use of PIs to deliberately expose other cattle in your herd to Pestivirus is a technique that certainly was used by the industry prior to the vaccine being available. And it can work because for people who aren't aware, Pestivirus is a bit like chicken pox in people in that if you are exposed to the disease, you do develop quite a prolonged immunity to the disease. So cattle that get exposed to Pestivirus will generally then will then have natural immunity to the disease for a number of years. The drawbacks of using a PI animal to deliberately expose the rest of your herd to Pestivirus, and certainly things that need to be considered if you want to go down that path, are, first of all, you need to be confident that that paw-doing animal is definitely a PI. So that warrants a test which can be done on either a hair sample or an ear notch or a blood sample to determine that it is definitely persistently infected with Pestivirus and isn't a paw-doing animal for any other reason. Next, Zoetis actually funded some trial work back in 2012 in the Western District of Victoria, and we got diagnosed PI animals and we put them into 2 weaning situations that are common on beef farms in Australia. The first is a yard weaning situation. So for 4 days, we had 170 cattle commingling with a PI animal. These animals were in a yard, quite a small yard situation with a single watering point and a single feed point to encourage mixing and exposure to that PI animal. At the end of that 4 days, we then blood tested all of the animals to see how many had successfully developed immunity to Pestivirus. And unfortunately, only 32% of animals had what we call seroconverted or developed immunity to the disease. So that's pretty low and actually means that about 70% of those animals are still naive or vulnerable to Pestivirus. The second situation that we tested was a paddock weaning situation. So we had a larger paddock where we had, again, 170 previously unexposed animals being weaned with a PI animal. And we left that PI in with those animals for 54 days. And at the end of that 54-day period, when we blood tested those animals to see who had developed immunity, we had a better result where we had about 80% of the animals showing that they've developed immunity to the disease. Unfortunately, that still means that 20% of the animals were completely naive or hadn't successfully been exposed to the PI. So if you want to go down that path, be aware that it doesn't guarantee that you'll get good protection from the disease, and really you would be best placed to test those animals after the period of exposure to assess your success and really double check that they have been adequately exposed to the disease. And just finally on that point, although I could keep talking about that question for 20 minutes or so, but the final point is just to keep in mind that those PI animals aren't just spreading pestivirus. Because their immune system is so heavily affected by that pestivirus infection, they can also be important carriers of other infectious diseases such as scours, viruses and bacteria, and respiratory diseases. So you may find that you're spreading more diseases than you intended to.
That's great. Thank you, Natalie. That actually answered a question that I had for you as well, but thank you for that, Jason.
Okay.
Natalie, there's a question here from Elizabeth Butler. She asked, in respect to leptospirosis, what is the period of time from infection to symptoms in humans?
That's a good question. And typically it's within 10 days that you'll start to, really feel an infection.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. There you go, Elizabeth. Graham Higham has asked a question here, Natalie. We have had pestivirus for our herd. Well, actually, that's a comment, not a question. Sorry about that. So okay. Phil Napier's got a question here for you in regards to pestivirus. If you have a self-replacing herd and test bulls when you bring them onto the property, is this a successful management strategy?
So if you can be confident that your biosecurity is pretty watertight, so you truly do have a closed herd, and as you say, you're testing all those bulls, but you also need to be confident that your animals aren't able to have nose-to-nose contact with neighbouring animals, and you want to make sure that you've got great fences that can keep strays out. So if you can be really confident that your biosecurity is ship-shape, then yes, that can go a really long way to controlling pestivirus. But it can be tricky to have that real level of confidence in your fencing.
Okay, great. Thanks, Natalie. Natalie, Mike has asked a question here. Is pestivirus really a significant financial disease to our cattle industry?
Mike, that's a really good question, and one of the things that I would love the industry to have is a real cost per head breakdown. The MLA report that was recently released, I think it was about 6 months ago, which really was a literature review of all the data that the industry has on key beef cattle diseases, including pestivirus, certainly rated the economic impact of pestivirus as being very important to the industry. And if you recall, the figure that's quoted in that report is $114 million a year in cost to the industry. The biggest cost to beef producers is in the lack of surplus stock to be able to turn off to market. Because if your pregnancy rates are affected, then that has the flow-on effect of impacting how many animals you actually have to be able to send to market. So my confident answer to that is absolutely. It has financial impacts, but the financial impact that it could be having on each individual herd can vary, and that is more challenging to quantify.
Great answer. Thank you, Natalie. Natalie, Michael Fleming has asked a question in regards to Vibriosis and AI in cattle. Is AI semen, is Vibriosis transferable to the female in AI semen?
Potentially, yes. But if you are using AI semen from accredited semen providers, then they are tested to be free of Vibriosis. But if you're doing your own collections using fresh semen that's not from an accredited AI centre, then you need to make sure that that bull is tested free of Vibriosis, because that semen could be contaminated with the bacteria.
Great, thanks for that. So Graham, who made the comment earlier, Graham Higham, he's asked a question here. Is the best strategy, and this is in regard to Pestivirus, is the best strategy to tail test all the herd and cull the PIs, and then what vaccination regime would be applicable for the remainder of the herd?
That's a good question, Graham, and I guess I'm not in a position to say what the best strategy is for any given herd. That is best worked out by sitting down with your vet and doing an analysis of your own situation and your risk profile. Certainly testing for PIs and culling is a method that is widely supported because those PIs are a major source of spread and are poor doers in the herd. So if you can reduce or eliminate PIs from your herd, then that can go a long way to controlling the disease. But it does mean that your females are likely to be completely naive to the disease down the track once you've removed all of those PI animals and they're no longer getting exposure to the disease, which is a good thing. But the flip side is, if your biosecurity isn't great, if you're not really careful about the animals that you're bringing onto your property or the contact that your animals could be having with neighbouring cattle herds or strays, then that can leave the herd wide open to crash if Pestivirus does come back into the herd. So that's when vaccination can be used in partnership with the PI removal program to make sure that you don't end up with a completely naive herd that's wide open to a reproductive effect. But I would stop short of saying that any one approach is the best, because it does depend on your circumstances and your risk profile.
Great, thanks Natalie. Natalie, a few questions ago Michael Fleming asked about Vibriosis in AI semen, and he's continued that question with almost a challenge here. If the Vibriosis virus lives in the sheath of the bull, then the AI semen should be free of disease. That's Michael's comment there.
I think, Michael, you're right in that it will lower the risk of having that disease spread. And I don't think that I would ever indicate that AI semen would be, even from a non-accredited centre, would be the major source of spread of Vibriosis. But living in the sheath, that means that the penis and the end of the penis are exposed to the virus, and therefore there can be contamination of the tip of the penis and therefore the semen as that's ejaculated. So there is still a risk, but I would not try to claim that that was going to be your highest risk of spread. Certainly that natural service and that direct contact of the male reproductive tract with the female reproductive tract is absolutely a #1 risk for spread of the disease.
Great, thanks Natalie. Natalie, Jason Clothier has commended you on your reply to his question with relation to whether you should be leaving the PI animals in the herd to help self-vaccinate against Pestivirus. So Jason's left that comment for you. Thank you, Jason, for your...
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Yeah, very much so. The encouragement's always helpful. Phil's made a comment here. Yes, so Phil's made a comment. I have tree corridors on the boundaries, so 2 fences, so I think that sounds as though you'd have fairly good barrier against neighbouring cattle unless they get a head of steam up and charge through both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's obviously hard for me to advise on any specific circumstances via a webinar and not being able to see anyone's individual property setups. So yeah, definitely recognise that challenge. I can only make general recommendations in this sort of forum.
Yeah, great. So Natalie, that's the last of the questions that have come through up until now. I just encourage anyone there, we've still got most of the participation online. If you'd like to ask a question, just type it in the box and Natalie will get to it. In the meanwhile, I'd like to thank Natalie, Dr. Natalie Robertson, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight to make it such a great webinar. If you have any other questions, please just pen them into the box now. Yes, okay, we've got another one here from Matthew and Mary Ellen. They asked Natalie, is there any more data on PI percentage? Any more data on PI percentage infections on management situations? Is there any more data on PI percentage infections on management situations?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Sorry, Michael. Certainly I can say that the most up-to-date indications indicate that the prevalence of PIs across Australia is at 1 to 2%. It tends to be fairly low because unfortunately these animals tend to die within the first 1 to 2 years of life because they are just such poor doers from being persistently infected with the virus. But I'm not sure that I'm really understanding the specific question, I'm sorry.
That's right, Natalie. I've actually asked Matthew if he'd like to just rephrase that question. He may be able to do that, and we'll be able to catch up with it there. Jen Lance has a question here for Natalie. What about using blood from PIs? And I think that's in relation to vaccinating against the Pestivirus.
Yeah, I have heard of this occurring. Certainly the risks are really related to hygiene and being really confident that Pestivirus is the only blood-borne disease that you're spreading. So, you know, there are certainly risks in using blood to transfer one disease and inadvertently transferring other significant diseases. So theoretically it can work, but you do need to be careful of the risks, and it's not again guaranteed that every animal will have an immune response if they're exposed to the blood of a PI animal and develop that natural immunity. So if you were using that method, one, be careful about other diseases, and two, I would encourage you to do some surveillance testing afterwards to check the success of that approach.
Great, Natalie. That's a good answer, and it sounds as though, as in many situations, some lateral thinking is always required when we approach these issues.
Yeah.
Natalie, I'm just going to try and interpret Matthew and Mary Ellen's question a little bit here. They say any more data on PI percentage infections on management situations. I think what they're referring to there is, do you have any more data on the percentage of the herd that will be or self-vaccinated as a result of having permanently infected animals amongst that herd.
Sure. Really the best data that we have as an industry is the data that Zoetis funded down in Western Victoria, which were the figures that I quoted earlier. So we've written up that the results of that trial work, and we're happy to share that with any participants if they are interested and want to provide their contact details. But as an industry, that is some of the most accurate and current data that we have on the spread or the success of using a PI to try to spread the disease in your herd.
Oh, that's excellent, Natalie. Thank you for that. So, Matthew and Mary Ellen, if you want to find more data on that, you can contact, you can obviously contact Natalie, or you're able to contact us at Home Sacket, and we'll definitely put you in touch. John Davey has a question for you, Natalie. His question is, should you test your bulls before vaccination for Vibriosis?
The short answer is no, you don't have to. In fact, the Vibriosis vaccine has another unique feature in that it can actually hasten an infected bull's recovery from the disease. So the vaccination actually incites such a strong immune response that that immune response can attack an existing infection and help to clear it up. If, however, I would definitely preface that with, if you have any indication that you may have a Vibriosis infection within your herd, so particularly if you've had really disappointing preg testing results, then yes, I would investigate that, and a good place to start is by doing some testing of your bulls. But in general, you can start a vaccination program straight away.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Natalie. So, Natalie, I think that just about draws all the questions to a close. No, hang on. I retract that. Jason Clathier has got another good question here for us. Natalie, on management, if you were a naive herd and had a severe infection of Pestivirus across the herd, you would assume the herd has been infected. You would start testing the young animals and also vaccinate the replacement heifers to minimise the initial cost of vaccination and testing. So I apologise. I think that is a comment from Jason. I'll repeat it to you on management.
I don't that's fine, and I don't disagree with what Jason's saying. How much you're comfortable assuming that the virus has truly spread throughout the herd depends on your appetite for risk. If you're a very low risk person, then I would still encourage some surveillance blood testing. Again, as I said, you don't have to test every animal. You can do it quite cost effectively by just testing a representative sample of each mob, just to assess, because the behaviour of the virus can be quite unpredictable, and you may still find that there are certain mobs that haven't been exposed and are still naive. But, you know, if you are willing to take on a little bit more risk and make an assumption that you've had a very widespread Pestivirus outbreak, a lot of spread, your management of your mobs means that there's been a lot of cross exposure, then I don't disagree with what Jason is saying, and that's starting with your replacement heifers and vaccinating them and moving forward is a very good option and a sensible way to get started in managing the disease, and as you say, minimising the costs. Every approach that we make in animal health or any sort of farm management approach obviously needs to be cost effective. So I don't disagree with Jason's comment at all.
That's great, Natalie. Thank you for that. And that's a good comment, Jason. We're always looking to weigh cost-effective solutions to our on-farm management issues. So, Natalie, again, I think that seems to have pulled our questions up. Natalie, I'd like to thank you very much for giving such a great presentation and for some very well considered answers to some great questions. I'd like to thank everyone else here for attending today's webinar. If you do have other questions, I encourage you to contact Home Sacket, the New South Wales More Beef from Pasture State Coordinators. Again, a quick reminder that and I'll just further to that, you're also welcome, if you wish to talk to Dr. Natalie Robertson about more topics, I'm sure she'd be happy to chat, and if you just contact us, we'll be more than happy to forward you through to her. Like I said
absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right, yeah, no worries. Thank you, Natalie. I just encourage everyone here that when you leave today's webinar, you will have a short survey pop up in front of you. Please take 5 minutes, 2 minutes to complete this, and we very much appreciate the feedback, and MLA do as well. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email within about 24 hours, and that email will have a link to the recording of this webinar, and if for some reason that the survey doesn't pop up after this webinar, there will be a link to the survey in the follow-up webinar as well. So Natalie, I think we're going to wrap it up there. On behalf of MLA, the MLA funded More Beef from Pastures program, and on behalf of our presenters, thanks everyone here for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.